Good day, sir and classmates. We will be reporting about woman's place in a man's life cycle. The first chapter of the book, In a Different Voice, Psychological Theory and Women's Development, written by Carol Gilligan in 1982. Woman's place in man's life cycle starts off with an excerpt from The Cherry Orchard by Anton Chekhov. In the second act of Chekhov's play, the protagonist, a young merchant named Lopahin, said, "At times, when I go to sleep, I think, Lord, thou gavest us immense forests, unbounded fields, and the widest horizons, and living in the midst of them, we should be giants." At which, Madame Ranevskaya interrupts him and warns, "You feel the need for giants. They are only good in fairy tales. Anywhere else, they only frighten us." The said part of the act shows how their perspectives differ from each other. Conceptions of the human life cycle represent attempts to order and make coherent the unfolding experiences and perceptions, the changing wishes and realities of everyday life, and they may vary depending on the observer's point of view. The excerpt in Chekhov's play suggests how a man's perception of the idea of humans being giants is different from that of a woman's, wherein Lopahin showed his optimism about the idea, while Madame Ranevskaya is being skeptical about it. And this also shows her cautious nature, which is a contrast to the ambitious Lopahin. This discrepancy in the perspectives of men and women is the center of Gilligan's book, which she wants to observe and assess. Gilligan further states that in the social sciences, sex differences are being rediscovered at a time in order to achieve equality and justice by removing the discrimination between sexes. This discovery arises when theories once assumed to be sexually neutral, in their scientific impartiality, are found instead to reflect observational and evaluative bias. An example of this sort is the classic The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. So merong nakitang bias sa writing na Strunk and White dito kung saan dinescribe nila yung man and woman. And sa man, ito yung statement kung paano siya dinescribe. He was an interesting talker, a man who had traveled all over the world and lived in a half-dozen countries. Meanwhile, sa woman, he saw a woman accompanied by two children walking slowly down the road. And if we compare how the man and the woman were depicted, obvious yung bias towards the man. So, in their writing, Strunk and White were implicitly adopting the male life as a norm. Likewise, yung story din ni Adam and Eve, which demonstrates among other things that making a woman out of a man will lead to trouble. The woman has been the deviant throughout the life cycle, just as she was in the Garden of Eden. So, makikita talaga sa mga examples na to na merong bias in favor of the man. In this case, pareho lang naman sila Adam and Eve na kumain ng forbidden fruit, pero na-mention dito na making a woman out of a man only leads to trouble. When Adam also made the choice himself na kainin yung fruit kahit na may pangudyok na nangyari galing kay Eve. Next is about Sigmund Freud's theory. Gilligan stated that the tendency of developmental theorists to present a masculine image may be traced back to Sigmund Freud. Freud based his psychosexual development theory on the experiences of the male child, culminating in the Oedipus complex. In the 1920s, he sought to resolve the conflicts in his theory and tried to fit women into his male idea, but he was unsuccessful, obviously. After failing to do so, he came to recognize a developmental difference in the strength and persistence of women's pre-Oedipal attachment to their mothers. However, he saw the difference in women's development as a developmental failure. Freud also concluded that for women, the level of what is ethically normal is different from what it is in men, and that women have less sense of justice than men, that they are less ready to submit to the great demands of life, that they are more often influenced in their judgments by feelings of affection and hostility. Sigmund Freud describes men as more superior than women, and in his observations, women are less capable. Chodorow then addresses this evaluative bias and attributes the continuing differences between the sexes to the fact that women universally are largely responsible for early childcare and for later female socialization. She further explains that because male and female children experiences are distinctive and they differ in their early social environments, basic sex differences in personality development occur. As a result, in any given community, feminine personality comes to define itself more in relation and connection to other people than masculine personality does. In psychoanalytic terminology, women are less individuated than men, and they have more flexible ego boundaries.
In this part of the report, we will talk about children games. Chodorow describes sex differences manifesting themselves in school children's games. The sex differences in personality formation that Chodorow describes in early childhood appear during the middle childhood years in studies of children's games. Children's games are considered by George Herbert Mead and Jean Piaget as the crucible of social development during the school years. In games, children learn to take the role of the other and come to see themselves through another's eyes. In games, they learn respect for rules and come to understand the ways rules can be made and changed. Janet Lever, considering the peer group to be the agent of socialization during the elementary school years and play to be a major activity of socialization at that time, set out to discover whether there are sex differences in the games that children play. Studying 181 fifth grade white middle class children, ages 10 and 11, she observed the organization and structure of their playtime activities. She watched the children as they played at school during recess and in physical education class, and in addition, kept diaries of their accounts as to how they spent their out of school time. This is the summary of Lever's observation throughout the study. Lever reports that boys play out of doors more often than girls do. Boys play more often in large and age heterogeneous groups. They play competitive games more often, and their games last longer than girls' games. The most interesting finding is that boys' games appear to last longer not only because they required a higher level of skills and were thus less likely to become boring, but also because, when disputes arose in the course of a game, boys were able to resolve the disputes more effectively than girls. In contrast, the eruption of disputes among girls tended to end the game. In Piaget's observation, girls have a more pragmatic attitude toward rules. Girls are more tolerant in their attitudes toward rules, more willing to make exception, and more easily reconciled to innovations. As a result, the legal sense, which Piaget considers essential to moral development, is far less developed in little girls than in boys. The bias that leads Piaget to equate male development with child development also colors Lever's work. The assumption that shapes her discussion of results is that the male model is the better one, since it fits the requirement for modern corporate success. In contrast, the sensitivity and care for the feelings of others that girls develop through their play have little market value and can even impede professional success. Lever also implies that given the realities of adult life, if a girl does not want to be left dependent on men, she will have to learn to play like a boy. In conclusion to Lever's observation throughout the study, boys learn both the independence and the organizational skills necessary for coordinating the activities of large and diverse groups of people. They also learn to deal with competition in a relatively forthright manner, all in accordance with the rules of the game. Girls, on the other hand, the girl plays tend to occur in smaller, more intimate groups, often the best friend dyad and in private places. Girl plays replicate the social pattern of primary human relationship in that its organization is more cooperative. They foster the development of empathy and sensitivity. Next, we will discuss about adolescence. The sex differences in personality formation in early childhood that Chodorow derives from her analysis of the mother-child relationship are thus extended by Lever's observations of sex differences in the play activities of middle childhood. Together, these accounts suggest that boys and girls arrived at puberty with a different interpersonal orientation and a different range of social experiences. Since adolescence is considered a crucial time for separation, the period of the second individuation process, female development has appeared most divergent and thus most problematic at this time. Freud stated that puberty, which brings about so great an accession of libido in boys, is marked in girls by a fresh of wave of repression, necessary for the transformation of the young girl's masculine sexuality into the specifically feminine sexuality of her adulthood. Freud further explains that puberty brings a new awareness of the wound to her narcissism and leads her to develop like a scar a sense of inferiority. The problem that female adolescence presents for theorists of human development is apparent in Erikson's scheme. Erikson charts 8 stages of psychosocial development, of which adolescence is the fifth. The task at this stage is to forge a coherent sense of self, to verify an identity that can span the discontinuity of puberty and make possible the adult capacity to love and work. Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development was based on a male child. This is because Erikson explains that the sequence is a bit different for the female. The female holds her identity in abeyance as she prepares to attract the man by whose name she will be known, by whose status she will be defined, and the man who will rescue her from emptiness and loneliness by feeling the inner peace. While for men, on the other hand, identity precedes intimacy and generativity in the optimal cycle of human separation and attachment of women. This task seem instead to be fused. For females, intimacy goes along with identity, as the female comes to know herself as she is known through her relationship with others. Sex differences of male and female adolescents of Erik Erikson was further discussed by Bruno Bettelheim using fairy tales. For male adolescents, Bettelheim used the fairy tale The Three Languages, wherein the male child was separated from his father and gained his identity in return. This depicts that males must be able to find his identity first. For the female adolescents, he used the fairy tales Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, wherein heroines awaken from their sleep not to conquer the world, but to marry a prince. This shows that intimacy goes along with identity, as the female comes to know herself as she is known through her relationship with the prince. Lastly, Bruno Bettelheim used the fairy tale Maxine Hon Kingston's Woman Warrior, where he explains that active adventure is a male activity and that if a woman was to embark on such endeavors, she must at least dress like a man.
Now let us proceed to the next part of the report, which focuses primarily on sex roles, competitive achievements, and moral development. I am Hazel Joy Nono, and I will be handling this part of the discussion. So to start with, let us go over McClelland's inputs on sex differences. David McClelland, an American psychologist, has inferred that sex roles have a great influence on human behavior. Arguably, sex differences have been found in many studies. However, since it was difficult to say different without saying better or worse, a point of reference has to be made, and this point of reference has been established to be that of men, since research data was predominantly gathered from their interpretations. Given this circumstance, psychologists have stated male behavior to be the norm, and female behavior was regarded as a sort of deviation from that norm. This is why whenever women do not conform to psychological expectations, the conclusion that something is wrong with women is almost immediately established. Martina Horner, another American psychologist, inferred that what was wrong with women was the anxiety they showed about competitive achievements. Now, for some context as to why she would reach this inference, human motivation back then and still in the present was popularly assessed using a TAT or thematic perception test. This was a test designed to reveal an individual's perception of interpersonal relationships. 31 picture cards serve as stimuli for stories and descriptions about relationships or social situations. In such tests, results always revealed certain sex differences that complicated the process of data analysis. Regardless, it is made clear of the fact that women tend to view situations differently, or that situations aroused a different sort of response from them. On the basis of his studies of men, McClelland identified two things that motivated people to achieve. This was hope for success and the fear for failure. However, in her studies of women, Horner identified another category for motivation, and this was known as a fear of success. But why would women fear success? Well, this was because a demonstration of competence was defined to be something masculine, and in fear of losing their femininity because of it, as well as fear of being socially rejected because of that loss, women become anxious and eventually give up or kill off their own aspirations, as well as any positive feelings they might have about success. George Sasson reiterates this point by acknowledging that women fear success because they have a heightened perception on the other side of competitive success, and these are known as great emotional costs. Basically, what he's trying to say is that the success of a woman will affect a lot of people, and their corresponding perceptions or reactions about it will take the respective toll on the woman, most especially if these perceptions are associated with negative outcomes. Sasson further elaborates that Horner did not fail to mention that success anxiety was only present in women when the achievement was directly competitive, which means that they only feel this way when their success is at the expense of another's failure. To further elaborate on this kind of identity crisis, Erikson cites the life of George Bernard Shaw as an example. In the example, it was demonstrated that despite Shaw's incompetence in his field of work during his 20s, he was not expelled for it, but instead was fastened even tighter to his line of work. This circumstance in which men are able to attain success despite doing minimal effort is determined to cause a slower growth of their personal development, primarily because they choose to stay and excel in fields that they do not even have a passion for. So why is it that men show such readiness to adopt and celebrate a narrow vision of success? The answer lies in their social orientation. Particularly speaking, men have a positional social orientation. This means that they are more concerned with the rules and are more likely to feel satisfied of their success when they have determined that the rules have indeed been followed on their path of achieving it. In shorter words, as long as they know that they have followed the rules, it is already enough for them to affirm their success and feel good about it. Women, on the other hand, are different because their social orientation is personal, which means that they are more concerned with what is going to happen to their relationships upon the achievement of success. Their decisions to pursue success in such case is dependent on the perceptions that people will have once they decide to achieve something. Because of this dependence on external factors such as relationships with other people that exists in women, men are considered to more likely feel complete whenever they achieve success because they only take into consideration a single factor, which as mentioned before would be the rules. Now let us proceed to Virginia Woolf's thoughts on this issue. According to her, masculine values are often the ones that prevail in society, and because of this, women frequently question their own feelings and even make alterations to their behavior and judgment in deference to the opinions of others. Woolf stated that this deference stems from the social subordination of women and their substance of moral concern. Contrary to her criticisms of these qualities being a weakness, Woolf also identifies these qualities to be a source of strength. Particularly speaking, sensitivity to the needs of others and the assumption of responsibility for taking care lead women to attend to voices other than their own and to include in their judgment others' points of view. This in turn leads her to conclude that women's moral weakness is inseparable from their moral strength. Due to the circumstances presented previously, women are known to define themselves in the context of human relationship and judge themselves on their ability to care, as this helps them build a sense of moral strength. As a result, they take on the role of nurturer, caretaker, and helpmate in a man's life cycle. Men, however, tend to devalue this care simply because their development is centralized on individuation and autonomy, a situation which causes them to view concern for relationships as a weakness that is often seen in women. The studies of Roverman, Vogel, Clarkson, and Rosencrantz in particular elaborates on this matter by discussing the stereotypes that relegates expressive capacities to women while placing instrumental abilities in the masculine domain. In other words, the qualities that are considered necessary for adulthood, such as autonomous thinking, clear decision making, and responsible action, are commonly associated with masculinity, and as such, they have been considered as undesirable attributes of the feminine self. As a consequence, the separateness of an individual self is favored over connection to others, or in other words, an autonomous life of work is prioritized instead of an interdependence between love and care in men. This results to men developing intimacy and affection at a latter point in their lives, which is in contrast to that of women that have already been equipped with these qualities from the very beginning. This perception that affection and intimacy is instinctive in women have caused psychologists to neglect or fail in describing women development, hence the reason why it is regarded to be shrouded in mystery. Another topic that was discussed in the literary work was about Kohlberg's 6 stages of moral development. It was inferred that women were deficient in this aspect simply because they tend to exemplify the third stage of a 6 stage sequence. At this stage, morality is conceived in interpersonal terms, and goodness is equated with helping and pleasing others. Kohlberg stated that women are deficient in moral development simply because, according to him, women cannot go past this stage. So in this idea alone, it presents a paradox as the very traits that have defined the goodness of women mark them as deficient in moral development.
How do people develop morality? This question has fascinated the philosophers for ages, but moral development has also become a hot topic in educational psychology. Lawrence Kohlberg, an American psychologist, created one of the most well-known theories that address some of these fundamental concerns. His study, built on Jean Piaget's previous work, focused more on explaining how children develop moral thinking. Kohlberg's theory has 3 levels with 2 stages each. First is the pre-conventional morality, and this refers to the stage of moral development before conventional morality. It lasts till the age of 9, where children's decisions at this age are mostly influenced by adult expectations and the penalties of breaking rules. The second level of conventional morality, where acceptance of social conventions regarding what is desirable and righteous, signifies the next stage of moral development. Adolescents and adults absorb the moral principles they've learned from their role models and society during this time. Lastly is the post-conventional morality, and people at this level have already acquired a knowledge of abstract moral principles. Despite being highly influential, Kohlberg's theory has been criticized in recent years for being Western-centric, biased toward men, and having a limited worldview centered on upper-middle-class ideologies and viewpoints. A 25-year-old man was asked for interview question, "What does the word morality mean to you?" He responded that nobody in the world knows the answer, and it is recognizing the right of the individual, the rights of other individuals, not interfering with those rights. It is to act as fairly as you would have others treat you, which is to preserve the human being's right to existence and also the human being's right to do as he pleases without interfering with somebody else's rights. The second response comes from a 25-year-old woman who participated in the Rights and Responsibilities study. She stated that we need to depend on each other, and hopefully it is not only a physical need, but a need of fulfillment in ourselves. That a person's life is enriched by cooperating with other people and striving to live in harmony with everybody else. So we can see that the man worries about people interfering with each other's rights, while the woman worries about the possibility of omission, of not helping others when you could help them. The young man's response illustrates a concept of morality based on rights, separation, and individuality. The young woman's response illustrates a concept of morality based on responsibility, connection, and relationships. The masculine rights conception aims to resolve moral issues objectively, and the feminine responsibility conception stresses the complex, imperfect nature of any resolution. If we are to use Kohlberg's six-stage scale to measure moral judgments, it implies that many women appear deficient, reaching only the third stage, which is morality and developing good interpersonal relationships. According to this theory, women cannot move to the stages based on abstract principles of justice unless they enter the public male realm. Paradoxically, for Kohlberg, women's caring for others makes them morally deficient, a concept of morality that values female experience that would make caring primary. Moral development involves pro-social behaviors like compassion, caring, and serving, as well as character traits like honesty, justice, and respect. Carol Gilligan was a student of Lawrence Kohlberg, a developmental psychologist who pioneered the theory of moral development stages. Because the participants in Kohlberg's study were predominantly male, and this theory did not incorporate the caring perspective, Gilligan concluded that her mentor's theory did not effectively address gender disparities in moral development. Male and females are typically socialized differently, and females are more likely than males to value interpersonal relationships and accept responsibility for others' well-being. This disparity, according to Gilligan, stems from the child's interaction with his or her mother, and females are generally taught a moral perspective that emphasizes community and caring about personal relationships. Instead, she argued that Kohlberg's approach overemphasizes ideas like justice and ignores moral reasoning based on the principles and ethics of caring and concern for others. The way Carol Gilligan expounded on the findings made a clear differentiation between how men and women perceive themselves. As Sally once said, without women's inclusion at the decision-making table, we cannot have any healthy decision-making that is good for men and women alike. Thank you so much.